Beneath the city of New York are living catacombs, an endless maze of subterranean tunnels, unfit for anything human.
Who doesn't love a good acronym? In the movie industry, there are surprisingly a few that resonate, though. We have the great late 40s noir DOA, the mega-knit film turned TV show MASH, and don't even get me started on the so bad it's good brilliance of Rotor. In the horror realm, though, there's really just one that comes to everyone's mind. Even if you haven't seen the movie, and I'm guessing most of this audience has, I'd wager you know what a chud is. You can also go look it up on Urban Dictionary. Go ahead, I'll wait. While the movie is certainly well known, does that make it a classic of 80s horror, or does its bark far outweigh its bite? The movie was released in just over 300 theaters on August 31st, 1984, from New World Pictures, who was founded in 1970 by the legendary Roger Corman. The movie did well in that limited release, making $4.7 million on its $1.25 million budget. Critics at the time were not kind to Chud, with it maintaining a Rotten Tomatoes score of only 29%. It has certainly grown into a fan-favorite cult classic, with Bloody Disgusting giving it a 4.5 out of 5. It was the only screenplay written by novelist Parnell Hall and the only directorial effort of editor Douglas Cheek. That may not be a huge red flag, but it also doesn't seem like a good thing for the writer and director to not work again in those roles. In front of the camera, we have Home Alone's John Hurd, Home Alone's Daniel Stern, character actor pro Christopher Curry, and a blink and you'll miss it, John Goodman.
That's it.
Chud follows photographer George Cooper and his model girlfriend, who have just found out they're pregnant, and they decide whether or not to have the baby, or whether or not they will even stay in New York. The movie also follows police Captain Bosch as he fights with his superiors over the rash of missing persons in a small section of the city, including his wife. The movie also follows AJ the Reverend Shepherd, who runs a homeless shelter while also going above and beyond to take care of those who are too scared to seek his help. These are the Undergrounders, and this is where the three stories intersect. When Cooper isn't doing shoots with his girlfriend, he's taking pictures of the Undergrounders for an expose that's being written by a reporter. Captain Bosch wonders if one of the more unhinged and reclusive homeless residents isn't the one taking all of the missing persons, and AJ worries about the stories that his Undergrounders are telling him. Our three protagonists eventually figure out that there is a cover-up being orchestrated by a man named Wilson who works for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Wilson is making sure that Bosch's higher-ups keep everything under wraps so that he can get everything cleaned up or destroyed. As more and more people go missing, the discovery of the titular Chuds make the stakes for the whole city higher. They are told that Chud stands for Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dweller, and that the body they found was the only one.
Chud, all right? It's dead.
AJ and George are eventually trapped in the sewers and discover that the Chuds are caused by, well, Chuds. In this case, CHUD actually stands for Contamination Hazard Urban Disposal. There's more than one creature down there, and all the radioactive materials have created these gross monsters wreaking havoc on the Soho district of New York. Wilson is trying to close off the sewers and gas the problem, along with any other witnesses, but when a diner is attacked by Chuds, the public goes wild. Wilson resorts to shooting Bosch after he threatens to go public, but when AJ and Cooper reach the surface, they get revenge for their friend as well as all the lives lost to the Chuds Wilson inadvertently created. While the city is no longer unaware of the threat and Wilson was exposed, the Chuds are still down there. Who knows how many other places have Chuds waiting to find food. I'll get this out of the way, but yes, the fashion and hairstyles are very of their time, but as we all know, that's just gonna happen. It will happen to all of us years down the line when they look at the 2020s, just like we do looking back at the pictures of ourselves from the 1990s.
What are you shishing me for? They know it, they made it, they can smell, they know what's in it, and they know what it takes to sell it.
One of the other really noticeable ones, though, is when Cooper calls his voicemail while on a shoot with his girlfriend.
Cooper, you son of a bitch, I'm in jail. I only get one phone call. You think I want to talk to some goddamn fucking machine?
Now, obviously voicemail still exists because most people don't want to answer calls anymore in a world of easy texting. What makes it stand out is how he checks his voicemail with a specific sound passcode to check his messages. This is something even I had to look up, just like my kids would look up VHS or Laserdisc. Another popular trope that we see is just how many grimy movies, specifically horror movies, wanted to make New York look. At this point, New York had tried hard to curb the stereotyping of its streets, but things like this movie and nearly anything Larry Cohen did would give the Big Apple a look and feel of absolute desolation. Look at a movie like Alligator. This scenario plays similarly to things like alligators living in the sewers, which was a very real rumor that was explored in the 2 alligator films made in 1980 and 91. They did transplant the city to Chicago, but the idea was the same. Hell, Jason Takes Manhattan would have us believe that the city literally blasts the sewers with toxic waste on a nightly basis.
To a dead meat slime bag!
While this is still a feature of horror today, it's usually used in throwback movies to simulate what movies like CHUD lived through. Finally, the biggest sign of the times involves horror movies being products of what goes on in the world around them. The biggest example of this is 1950s sci-fi horror that was trying to elicit fears of the new nuclear age. So many of that decade's films involve creatures being created by nuclear weapons and technology, or an apocalyptic post-nuclear landscape that leaves humanity destroyed. The biggest and longest running example here is of course Godzilla. Godzilla comes from the very land that very real nuclear scenario happened to, and Godzilla himself is a manifestation of nuclear weapons. Once it was awakened, or used in this case, there was no way to put the toothpaste back in the tube. CHUD takes this a step further. The 1980s were a decade of environmental fears. You can see this in Larry Cohen's The Stuff, The Quiet Earth, and even in movies you wouldn't think about. The zombies in Return of the Living Dead are basically brain-eating toxic waste in their own containers. CHUD combines this overall worry with a true-life event ripped right out of the headlines. In the late 1970s, it was discovered that under the city of Love Canal, New York, there was toxic waste being dumped. Now, we didn't get any CHUD monsters stalking the Niagara Falls area, but there were fish and other wildlife dying and human beings being poisoned by the very places they called home. Sign of the times indeed. This is where I assume the pitchforks and torches will come out. There isn't a ton to love here in CHUD. It's not a bad movie by any means, but it doesn't exactly deserve its cult classic status. What does hold up, something that the 2 past films couldn't say, is the score. David A. Hughes doesn't have the same recognizable catalog as some of the heavy hitters in the composer game, but he made a great creepy score that is far moodier than the titular characters deserve. His only other work that I recognized was for Guy Ritchie's introduction to the world in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. The other thing that holds up is the makeup effects, well, other than the chuds. There are plenty of gnarly open leg wounds, severed heads, and bodies strewn about the infested sewers. While the movie isn't as gory as it should and could be, there are enough things here to keep you invested. It works particularly well when mixed in with the previous mentioned musical score when our heroes are skulking around in the sewers. On top of this, there's actually one really good scene that uses the lack of chuds to its advantage. The cops and the NRC guys are in the sewers to clean out the remaining chuds, and we see much of it through the lens of a camera. You hear much more than you see, and the humans don't end up making it out. It's a great mixture of all the good elements the movie has to offer squished together in one memorable scene. The quick answer is everything that wasn't mentioned in the last section, but let's dissect it a bit. The movie does have a fun cast, including a random Patricia Richardson sighting for the second straight movie, but it may not be the right cast for this movie. As the patron saint of drive-ins, Joe Bob Briggs said in his most recent Shudder showing of this movie, there are serious theater actors. It's a horror movie made by people who don't like or know horror movies all that well. John Hurt is a thoroughly unlikable character, and he is sleepwalking through this entire performance. Daniel Stern is, however, chewing scenery like he's Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing in an old Hammer film production, and Christopher Curry shows less emotion for his wife dying than he does getting mad at the NRC goon. The fact that we have these 3 characters with their own storylines is a bit redundant. One of these characters could solo lead the story and still hit all the plot beats the writers wanted. We could nitpick the litany of problems that poor CHUD is plagued with, but the biggest offender is the CHUDs themselves. To paraphrase Jeff Goldblum's Dr. Ian Malcolm, are there going to be any chuds in your CHUD movie? Now, I understand this is part of an unfortunate circumstance. The creatures weren't originally supposed to be creatures at all, but simply cannibals. You can see what this would have looked like near the end of the movie when Cooper is attacked by one of the undergrounders that is beginning to turn into a CHUD. He's still very much human, and if that were the case, he would have seen our villains a lot more. The poor makeup and design department had so little time to prepare after the decision was made that we only ended up with a couple of CHUD outfits. When they do show up and we get a decent look at them, they are nothing to write home about either. Just slimy dudes with giant glowing eyes who look rather rubbery. It's hard to get behind a chud movie with so few chuds. Unfortunately, today's movie is a case of its reputation being far better than the product it actually delivers. It certainly has a legacy behind it with a misguided sequel called Bud the Chud, and countless pop culture references from The Simpsons to Clerks 2.
And that's when the chuds came at me.
You're the most hideous fucking chud I've ever met, and you always have a pair of girls fighting over you.
It even shows up prominently in the opening of Jordan Peele's sophomore effort, Us. It had an April Fool's announcement from Criterion Films, but Arrow decided to one-up that by actually producing a 2-disc Blu-ray full of special features. This silly property has had remake discussions and even a short story collection featuring tales in the Chud universe. Nearly 40 years on, the original product simply doesn't live up to its hype and sadly doesn't stand the test of time.